Hi guys, this is Tim from Retirement is Underrated, and I want to welcome back to the channel. Thank you for continuing watching. And I got some bugs flying around me, but figured I'd try a different angle, looking back at the house from the back porch. But today I wanted to talk about a little bit about minimalism, but really in the perspective of the generational change. And what do I mean by that? What I'm thinking about today is, how was it different from my parents' generation or even from my grandparents' generation to my generation now, or even to my children? The idea of minimalism really, and I was asking my wife about this, minimalism has really crept on the screens, probably over the last 20, 25 years. You have uh, guys like the Minimalists, which are Ryan Nicodemus and I forget the other one. Forgive me for that, but you know, I started watching it years ago about the whole idea of minimalism, and I was talking to my wife, and I don't, you know, when we were growing up, I don't think the idea of minimalism ever was a word on our lips. It wasn't even until we really later on started thinking about the idea of minimalism. And I just wanted to think back to how was it for my grandparents and my parents and then us and now my kids, and the way minimalism has kind of crept into our lives. And just again, guys, this is my opinion, this is my perspective. Each of you will have your own perspective, and I totally respect that. But I was thinking back to, I think sometimes the way we grow up or the things we are exposed to affect how we look on things and how we look on possessions or things in our lives. And I was thinking back to my grandparents, especially my grandparents on my mother's side. They were just over from Germany. After the First World War, they actually met each other in the German-American Club. And for them, they experienced some extreme poverty. So for them, it was really, especially for my grandmother, she talked a lot about it. It was about, holding on to what you had because you had so little. And she would talk about the German mark at that time being devaluated into nothing and being worth nothing, and just how little their family had. And then just even how that affected her and the way she lived her life with my grandfather, and then how she raised my mother and my aunt. And it really did have an effect. I mean, I'm sure them growing up with very little or little, the, having very little in their lives and going through extreme hardship, coming to America was an incredible thing of opportunity. But my grandmother was always very frugal, and she was a great woman. She was just, I think back to my grandparents with great fondness. But for them, my grandmother was always frugal with the things. She would save plastic wrap, plastic bottle, plastic bags, reuse things. Save, if you cooked vegetables, you save the vegetable water. Everything was saved. Everything was reused for something else. And this was kind of the environment my mother was raised in, and just looking how that would affect her. And also in the German culture, or even being the first one, the older one, my mother, she was the older of two daughters that they had. And for her, there was a great expectation, you being the older one, her being the older one, of a lot was expected of her. And my grandmother was especially hard on her, where maybe not as hard on my aunt as much, her younger sister. But always instilling in my mother the sense of, making the most of what you had. And I've shared this before, just my mother about talking about you can do a lot with a little or a little with a lot. There's a lot to be said for that. And she always, when she raised us, she had 5 boys. God bless her. 5 boys. 4 of us are remaining. I lost my brother last year, Ken, in 24. And I still remember him to this day. And just, I appreciate the impact he made on my life, but I could share more about that another time. But she had 5 boys to raise. She often had said she wouldn't know what to do with daughters and how to raise them. She had 5 sons, and she ruled them with an iron fist, and she would be honest like white on rice. But we were always, it was very important for my mother, and especially for my grandmother. They were very much about passing on something to the next generation. My grandmother to my mother left a small but modest, but considering what they had or what they didn't have, they left her with something nice. And my mother always had that instilled. She was going to leave something nice for her boys, and she was very frugal. She would save things. And she would always, her refrigerator was packed to the gills. I mean, you'd even forget what was in the refrigerator, but we had it in there, just from a mindset, I think, of doing without and trying to make the most of everything. And the accumulation of things, material possessions meant a lot more different things to my parents and that generation than it did to mine, and then even to my kids. For my mother, she was very much into what she could pass on. In fact, to the point where she would actually stick somebody's name underneath a piece of furniture or dining room table or something that she could pass on. It was so important to her to leave that piece of legacy, something to pass on. And she would do it to the extreme. I mean, it was always a little uncomfortable for me. I mean, it was just, and we wanted my mother to enjoy her retirement, but she was so much about passing on a legacy, passing on something that, the idea of minimalism to my mother would have been a foreign concept. She was about accumulating things because I think to a certain extent, and I could be wrong, if my siblings would listen to this or see, they might have a different perspective, but to each their own. It was so important to her to pass on things. I even remember when she passed away, we were going through things, and just she would pack things away. In fact, I don't know how many of you would have remembered, there was a shop called the Christmas Tree Shop. It was big in Massachusetts, and it had its time where it was a big thing where you could buy cheap Chinese stuff for short money, and she had a lot of stuff that she accumulated from that. It used to be really nice, and then they got into other things, but she had this thing about napkins and things that she would store away. In fact, when she passed away, we had enough napkins, nice napkins too, by the way. She had great taste, but decorative napkins nonetheless, to where we had napkins probably for at least 3 years that we were still using up. And my kids remember that as well. And of course, she passed on things to us as well, and a lot of things. She had a lot of things in her house, and so much so that it became, I don't know if she was she wasn't really a hoarder to the traditional sense, but she accumulated a lot of stuff. And towards the end, when she did pass away, she didn't want her things. Things meant so much to her that she didn't want her household disassembled and taken apart. Her value was in those things. And I think about that with our generation and the things passed on to us, and then and also with my mother-in-law. She was a great woman, Madeline. I won't mention the last name, but my wife's mother, incredible woman. She was a great mother to me. I was very fortunate, but again, we inherited a lot of stuff from her when she shut her eyes, and it meant something to that generation to pass something on, to think maybe it was a sense of living on beyond the point that you were living. But they both passed on things, so much so that with us, we had our home here in upstate New York. We had piles of stuff, and then my neighbor moved and he gave us some stuff, so we had piles of stuff. Oh my goodness, we had more stuff than Carter's Got Bills. But this stuff would pile up, and my wife and I, as far as our generation, it was a different thing. We were happy to receive things, and certain items remind us of things, like For my wife, the dining room set that she got from her mother, there's a lot of sentimentality. We have a piano from her grandmother. We would call her grandma, and just the idea again, they, their memory lives on in the things that they've left you. But we after a while actually accumulated quite a bit of stuff. I mean, it was just ridiculous. If you get a bigger space, don't fool yourself. You're going to fill it up with stuff. But, so we receive those things. But then I think about, so that's our generation. But the way we raise our children, that we have, my wife and I, we have two kids. Names are John and Gabby. And, we never raised them about stuff. We wanted to instill core values in them, things like respect for women, treating women well, honoring your father and mother, and just, core values that would last them through their lives, and then let the decisions that they make, rest on those values. But I could tell you honestly, my kids really don't care about the stuff. We don't have anything labeled for anybody, although I did ask my son and my daughter, so there's a couple things they might want. But again, I made it clear to them. I said, look, should I, and I will, shut my eyes one day and you've got this stuff there is no, I will never hold it against you if you get rid of it. That I understand it'll become yours and you do what you want with it. I don't want to burden my children with a bunch of stuff, a bunch of physical possessions that they're going to have to go through one day. I'd rather afford them maybe even some monetary stuff that they can go and enjoy and experience life. My kids turned out great. So it's a whole different thing, from the way my grandparents treated things and material possession with minimalism, not even an idea, but maybe scarcity. They had scarcity in their lives, so they accumulated things. My mother, just accumulating things, but maybe with that scarcity idea and mindset that she collected things to show that she had things. And hey guys, sorry about that. The camera actually overheated. That's the first time. So with the idea of scarcity with my mother, I think that explains probably why she collected things and had a bunch of stuff in her home. So material possessions meant a lot to her. But again, that perspective between the generations, and I'll be talking about in other videos how we started a minimalistic journey that we're under, and there's plenty to share about that, but I won't get into that in a moment. But just the idea of the generations and how they change. Minimalism really wasn't a thing back, even I think it started to see more of it when we moved out here to upstate New York in 2004, but we didn't even see it in our early on in marriage. We collected, my wife and I, we collected a lot of stuff, and then I had a lot of stuff. In fact, growing up, I was kind of like a little hoarder. I had so many things. I'd say paperwork from my school, even so much my brother kept it in his attic on the Cape for years, and so much so that he finally begged me, please come over and get it out of there when I was living in Boston. And I did, and and in the end I threw most of it out. Oh, bless his heart that he kept all that stuff for years. I didn't keep any of it, or very little of it. In fact, I probably don't even have any of it to this day. And so it's a difference, in a different time we're living in. But I understand the generation that our parents came through, the baby, what led to us, the baby boomers, and I'm kind of one of the last baby boomers. There might be a couple after me, a couple years after me, but that idea. So I understand where we came from, but where we're going. But I'll close it out with this. I always encourage my children, don't get hung up on things. Don't get hung up on material things that you collect. It doesn't mean anything. Enjoy experiences, travel, do things, have relationships with people. Your stuff doesn't matter. In fact, it'll weigh you down, and I'm going to talk about that at some point soon, but it becomes a weight. My son just came back from Europe after doing some missionary work, and he lived for months with just 2 small bags of stuff. He just, and it was a wonderful experience. He got to see things, and he'll be able to look back on his life as at the experiences and the fun that he had and the relationships that he got to have as being part of that. And it wouldn't matter a hoot or a holler if he had a fancy car here now, or a bunch of stuff, or a bunch of money in the bank, but he has experiences that he can look back on. And my daughter, she's off on great adventures, trying to find her first job. And you know, we were blessed with some great kids. So all that, so I guess in a nutshell, just kind of wrap it up like my friend Ralph from Boston used to talk about. You know, you talk about something, you wrap it up. Just talking about the generational changes. You know, what the different generations thought about stuff, and where we are now, and even where our kids are. So I want to thank you for joining me today, taking time out of your day. There's lots of things, other things you could have done besides watch me. But I appreciate the time you've taken out, and, you know, have a great day. Have a wonderful day. Make the most of this day. And remember, retirement is underrated.